chicken that's nearly 3 centuries old, and it tastes almost nothing like what comes out of a bucket at the drive-thru. Ask most people, and they'll tell you fried chicken is a Southern invention through and through. Cast iron, seasoned flour. That's the whole story, as far as anybody knows it. But the real history runs older and stranger than that. What I'm about to show you comes straight out of an English cookery book printed in 1736, decades before America existed as a nation, and the women cooking from books like that understood something we've lost hold of entirely. They put the flavor into the bird before the fat ever touches it, not after. The secret to this chicken was never in the coating. It was in what happened to the meat during the hours leading up to the cooking. Think about most fried chicken you've eaten. What you're really tasting is the crust, the seasoned breading, salt and pepper, some spice mix from a packet, sitting on top of chicken that, underneath all that coating, tastes like almost nothing at all. This older method flips that completely. The flavor gets driven deep into the meat itself, and the crust exists only to seal it in and turn it crisp. Once you understand this difference, it's hard to go back to the other way, and you'll find yourself wondering how such a good method ever got set aside. I still remember watching my own grandmother fry chicken the proper way for the first time. I was maybe 6, perched on a stool at her elbow, and she had a bowl of chicken sitting on the counter since right after lunch. I asked her why she didn't just cook it already, and she told me something I've carried with me ever since. She said, "The waiting is the cooking. The heat only finishes what the patience already started." I didn't understand that sentence as a child. I understand it completely now, and it's the whole point of what I want to walk you through today. My name is Nomi Yoder, and I run a household here in Lancaster County the way my mother and grandmother ran theirs before me. Before we get into it, the methods I share here, this one included, only scratch the surface of what my family actually does in a given week. I've been slowly writing down the fuller versions, the ones too long for a single video, and I share them with anyone who asks in the comments. Now, let's get into the chicken. And I'll take this slow enough that you could turn the video off partway through and finish the recipe from memory alone. The marinade is everything. Start with the marinade because this dish succeeds or fails entirely on what happens in that bowl. Everything worthwhile about this chicken happens in the first 3 hours, long before any heat gets involved. The marinade begins with something sharp and sour. The old recipe calls for 2 sour ingredients working together. Lemon juice, paired with something called verjuice. Verjuice is a word most people today would need to look up, and I certainly did the first time I came across it in the original text. It's the pressed juice of unripe grapes, picked before they've had a chance to sweeten, sour, green tasting, but soft on the tongue, not the harsh bite you'd expect. Before lemons were something you could reliably buy at any market, verjuice was the sour ingredient a cook reached for automatically. Kitchens pressed it from the small, hard grapes that would never ripen properly anyway, the ones on the shaded side of the vine that the sun never quite reached, and they kept jars of it through the cellar all season. Nothing got thrown away in those kitchens. I think about that a lot, honestly, because it says something about how those cooks viewed the world. To them, nothing was truly useless. The grape too sour to eat still had a purpose. It became the sourness in tomorrow's dinner. The bone too tough to chew became 3 days of broth. The rendered fat from one meal became the frying oil for the next. Everything moved in a circle, and every last scrap eventually fed somebody. We've broken that circle almost entirely. Nowadays, we throw the sour grape in the compost and drive to the store to buy a bottle of something manufactured to replace what it would have given us for nothing. Most kitchens today don't keep verjuice on hand, myself included most seasons, so plain vinegar takes its place just fine. But it helps to understand what you're substituting for, because that tells you what you're aiming for, something bright and sour but not harsh, not a vinegar so aggressive it strips every other flavor off your tongue. Malt vinegar comes closest to what an English kitchen of that era would have actually used, since what the old books called wine vinegar back then is closer to today's malt vinegar than to anything made from grapes. If malt is too sharp for your taste, cider vinegar works well. And if that's not on your shelf either, ordinary white distilled vinegar will get the job done. I use the juice of 2 decent-sized lemons, then match that with an equal amount of vinegar. That's your sour base right there. Lemons deserve a mention of their own here, because in 1736 a lemon wasn't a casual thing to have in the house. Whether your household saw a lemon at all depended heavily on geography and means. They traveled by ship from warmer regions, and an inland family of modest means might go an entire year without one crossing their threshold. Here's something the old recipe collections reveal that tends to surprise people. Dried lemon peel was one of the most frequently listed flavorings in 18th century kitchens, not because lemons were plentiful, but because when one finally arrived, every part of it got used. The juice went into dishes like this one. The zest got dried and stored, flavoring cakes, custards, and sauces for weeks afterward. Nothing from that rare fruit went to waste. That's the mindset behind an old kitchen. You use the entirety of something precious, because you have no idea when the next one will show up. Into that sour liquid go your seasonings: salt, black pepper, a couple of whole cloves, and 2 bay leaves. The original recipe, like most old cookery books, is vague on exact quantities. It was written for women who already knew their own kitchens by feel, who measured with a pinch and a glance rather than a spoon. The only firm number given is for the bay leaves, 2. So let me give you the numbers I've settled on through trial. About a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of black pepper, and a scant quarter teaspoon of ground cloves. Go easy on the cloves especially. It's a heavy, warm spice, and too much will overpower everything else in the bowl. Then add a half cup of chopped green onions. The original text uses an older word for them that took some digging to place, but it simply means what we'd call scallions or spring onions today. If you happen to have shallots on hand, use those instead. I'd almost recommend it, since shallots were common in kitchens of that era and bring a rounder, sweeter onion note to the marinade. Either works. The onion isn't meant to stand out on its own. It's there to give the sourness something to lean against. Stir it all together: lemon, vinegar, salt, pepper, cloves, bay, onion, and taste it with a clean spoon. It should make you pucker just slightly, bright and sharp, with a warm undertone from the clove sitting beneath it. Too fierce, and a splash more lemon will settle it down. Trust your own palate here over any printed measurement. Preparing the bird. Now the chicken itself. The original recipe calls for quartering the bird into 4 large pieces, but I break mine down smaller, into the pieces you'd actually want served at a table. Thighs, drumsticks, wings, the breast split again. There's a plain reason for this. It stretches further. When you've got a long table full of hungry kids on both sides of it, a chicken cut into 8 or 10 pieces feeds more people than one cut into 4. That's not a fancy culinary reason, it's a practical household one, and the old cooks always worked from practical reasons. While you've got the knife out, here's another piece of the same lesson about wasting nothing. The backbone, the wing tips, the bony bits that don't fry up into a proper serving piece. Don't throw any of that away. Set it in a pot with an onion, a little salt and water, and let it simmer low all afternoon into a broth worth more than the meat itself. Neck, carcass, whatever's left once the good cuts are off, all of it has a second life in the stock pot. My grandmother stretched one hen into 3 separate meals for the family, and she'd have felt she'd failed if she got fewer. The fried chicken was the feast. The broth was the week that followed. One bird carried the whole household because nothing from it ever went to waste. Lay your chicken pieces into the marinade, turning them until every surface is coated, and let them sit for 3 hours. I want to be precise here. 3 hours, not overnight, not as long as you can manage. This detail matters more than it might seem. If you've used a stronger vinegar like malt and you leave that chicken sitting in it all night, the acid keeps working the entire time. It pulls too deep into the meat, turns the flavor sharp and unpleasant, and starts breaking down the texture until it goes soft and mealy. Sour is your friend for 3 hours and your enemy after that. Set a timer if you need to. Cover the bowl and keep it somewhere cold while it works. Raw chicken sitting at room temperature, especially in warm weather, is asking for trouble. The batter. Nothing like what you're used to. While the chicken sits, you've got time to make the batter, and this is where the old method departs completely from the fried chicken most of us grew up with. There's no buttermilk soak here. No bowl of seasoned flour for dredging and shaking. Instead, you make a thin batter, closer to a pancake batter than anything else, and dip the chicken straight into it. Fried, that batter sets into a light, crisp shell, a completely different texture from the thick, craggy crust of Southern-style fried chicken. It's finer, more like a fritter coating, and it shatters lightly under the teeth instead of crunching heavily. Start with about a cup and a half of plain all-purpose flour. Then pour in a light white wine. The original recipe calls for something in the style of a Rhine wine, adding it gradually and stirring as you go, until the flour thins into a batter that coats the back of a spoon but still runs freely off it. Not thick, not gluey, thin. Once it's there, beat in 3 egg yolks, which add richness and help the batter brown properly, along with a teaspoon of salt. Mix until smooth with no dry lumps hiding anywhere. If it's gone too thick, loosen it with a splash more wine. Too thin, add another spoonful of flour. You'll know when it's right. It should ribbon off the spoon in a thin, steady stream. Not every kitchen keeps wine around, and that's no obstacle at all. Apple cider does the same job and adds its own pleasant note. In a genuine pinch, plain water will produce a working batter, though I'll be honest, you lose some of the richness the wine or cider would have given. Don't let a missing bottle of wine stop you from trying this. The method matters far more than any single ingredient in it. The fat, where you need to pay attention. While the batter rests and the chicken finishes its 3 hours, let's talk about the fat, because frying is the part of this recipe that demands your full attention. The original recipe never specifies what to fry in, and that's simply because in 1736 the answer was obvious enough that nobody bothered writing it down. Kitchens fried in rendered lard or clarified butter for a finer result. Those were the fats a household actually had available. Use whatever frying oil you already keep in your own kitchen today. There's no need to render lard specially, unless you want to. Whatever fat you choose, use enough to fully submerge the pieces. This is deep frying, not shallow pan frying. A deep, heavy pot works better than a wide, shallow pan, both for even cooking and for safety, since the fat is far less likely to slosh over the edge. Bring your fat to roughly 350 degrees Fahrenheit. If you own a thermometer, use it. If you don't, here's how cooks judged it before thermometers were common, and how you can too. The surface should shimmer and ripple like heat rising off pavement in July, without giving off any visible smoke. Another old test: drop in a small cube of bread. If it browns gently over about a minute, bubbling steadily around its edges, your fat is ready. If it browns almost instantly, pull the heat back, it's too hot. If the bread just sits there pale, soaking up grease without, fat isn't hot enough yet, and your chicken will come out greasy. The instant you see smoke rising, the fat has gone too far, it's beginning to break down, and your coating will scorch outside before the chicken finishes cooking inside. If that happens, pull the pot off the heat and let it settle before continuing. I need to stop here and talk about safety plainly, because I'd never forgive myself if I sent you towards something dangerous, without a proper warning. Deep frying in hot fat is likely the single most dangerous thing most home cooks ever do in a kitchen. A pot of fat at 350 degrees Fahrenheit will burn you instantly, and worse, it can catch fire. Handle this with full attention, never distracted, never rushed. Keep children well away from the stove for the entire process. This is no moment for little ones underfoot. Keep a lid or a baking sheet within arm's reach. If the fat ever flares up, smother the flame with the lid. Cut off its air supply. Never, under any circumstances, throw water on a grease fire. Water hitting burning fat turns into a column of flame that can reach the ceiling and take the whole kitchen with it. If a small fire won't smother, leave the house immediately and call for help. Dry your hands completely before working near the pot. A single drop of water hitting hot fat will spit and can scald you badly. And always lower chicken pieces into the fat gently and away from your body, never dropped in from a height that splashes hot fat back at you. Treat hot fat with the same respect you'd give something genuinely dangerous, because it is. None of this is meant to scare you away. It's meant to keep you safe enough to make this recipe 100 more times. Frying and finishing. Dip each marinated piece of chicken into the batter, turn it until fully coated, and let the excess drip back into the bowl before lowering it gently into the fat. Fry in small batches, 3 or 4 pieces at a time, 5 at most if your pot is large, but no more. Here's why crowding the pot is a mistake. Every cold piece you add drops the temperature of the fat. Add too many at once, and the fat cools too far. So instead of frying crisp, the chicken sits stewing in lukewarm grease and comes out pale, greasy, and disappointing. A few pieces at a time keeps the fat hot and the crust crisp. Patience here pays off on the plate. Let the fat return to temperature between batches before adding the next round. Fry each batch until the coating reaches a deep, rich color. The original text describes it as light mahogany, which is exactly the right description. Not pale, not scorched dark, but that warm reddish brown of good old furniture. Color alone doesn't tell the whole story, though, and this part matters. The chicken needs to cook all the way through to the bone, and the batter can brown before the inside is fully done, especially on thicker pieces like breast and thigh. Give those larger pieces the extra time they genuinely need, and when you think a batch is finished, cut into the thickest piece down to the bone and check. The juices should run completely clear, never pink, and the meat should be white throughout with no rosy color near the bone. Once you've fried a batch or two, you'll get a feel for the timing, but until then, always cut and check. There's no shame in it. Every good cook does the same. As each batch comes out, transfer it to a wire rack rather than a plate, letting the excess fat drain away while you fry the rest. A rack beats a flat plate because on a plate, the underside sits in its own drained grease and turns soft. If your oven runs warm, crack the door and set the finished pieces inside to hold their heat while the last batch cooks. The finishing touch. There's one more step, and I know it'll sound unusual, but trust the old recipe here. It's a small detail that elevates the entire dish. Fried parsley. Take a generous handful of fresh parsley and, before it comes anywhere near the hot fat, make absolutely certain it's completely dry. Not damp, bone dry. Blot it thoroughly in a clean towel, press it, pat it, until not a single drop of moisture remains. I can't stress this enough, and it's as much a safety matter as a cooking one. Wet greens dropped into hot fat will spit and throw scalding grease in every direction. Anything wet meeting hot fat is genuinely dangerous, so dry that parsley like it matters, because it does. Once it's fully dry, fry it in small batches for just a few seconds each, until it turns crisp, dark green, and nearly translucent. This happens fast, faster than you'd expect. So don't step away. Lift it out immediately and let it drain, then crumble it over the top of your finished chicken like a green garnish scattered across the plate. It brings flavor, a light crispness, and a touch of green you'd never expect to see on fried chicken, and it lifts the entire dish from good to genuinely memorable. It costs nothing but a handful of parsley and a minute of care. And there you have it, fried chicken the way an English household made it in 1736. The flavor is unlike what most of us grew up eating. A brightness from the lemon and sour marinade runs all the way through the meat rather than sitting on the surface. The crust is light and crisp instead of thick and heavy. And that crumbled fried parsley adds something fresh and unexpected on top. The first bite catches people off guard, and then they understand exactly why someone bothered writing this down nearly 300 years ago, and why it's such a shame the method was ever set aside. Why did this disappear? Here's the part I want you to actually sit with for a moment, because it matters more to me than the recipe itself. Why would a method this good get forgotten? Think about it honestly. A bird flavored for 3 hours in a bright, sour marinade, sealed in a light, crisp batter, fried to a deep gold, finished with crumbled green herbs. That's not harder than what most people do today. It's not more expensive. It doesn't call for rare ingredients or special training. It's simply older, and here's the hard truth I've come to accept. The older something gets, the fewer reasons anyone has to keep it alive.